We see people seeing more of Hatch, going to the website to learn more. The traffic, to the website is immense. A lot of people were getting traction that they ordinarily wouldn't have got, once they started to see the actual engagement on their posts. It encouraged them to keep going because they never would see such engagement before then. And if anyone thinks that they can't do it, I'm here to tell you absolutely can. Employee advocacy should not be passive. It's not just a nice to have marketing add-on. The results were actually incredible because it was massive. It boosted the overall campaign numbers significantly.
Welcome to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name's Lewis Gray. I'm a Senior Marketing Manager here at Disseminate, and my co-host, as always, is Elliot Elsley. Our special guest today is Tolulope Aribisala-Tijani from Hatch, and we've got a very interesting episode lined up. We've got quite a lot to get through, but for the listeners' sake, Hatch is an engineering firm, and engineers naturally aren't using social media typically as part of their day-to-day role. So something that we really wanted to focus on today is how Tolulope and how the Hatch team have activated their engineers on social media to demonstrate their subject matter expertise. But before we get into any of that, I could really ramble on because we've got a lot of territory to cover here. Tolulope, could you just introduce yourself and your role at Hatch for our listeners?
Okay, thank you so much, Lewis. My name is Tolulope, like you said. And I'm a marketing and communications professional with about 8 years of experience in the field. So from public relations to brand management and now employee advocacy, social media. That's pretty much what I've been doing over the past 8 years. So I started my career at a PR agency called Hill & Knowlton. I don't know if you're aware, but I started as a junior account executive and grew over time. And then a little over 2 years ago, I moved to Canada, and that was the point I joined Hatch. And when I joined Hatch to support the marketing team, I started off with just basic social media and marketing support, but now I lead the overall social media marketing strategy, which also encompasses the employee advocacy side of things, while also supporting with public relations. So I don't know if that was a good enough summary, but that's pretty much what I've been up to these past 8 years.
No, that's plenty. And that's the context that we need for today's episode, I think. So before we go into the specifics of your employee advocacy program, something that we find is just particularly helpful, just to give our listeners context, is to provide a high-level overview of your employee advocacy program. So would you mind just providing that, and then we can really jump into the details here?
Okay. So the employee advocacy strategy that we have right now started off officially February of 2025. And since then, we've been managing an average of 80 to 90 subject matter experts on and off across metals, energy, infrastructure, and our other business practices. And essentially what we do is just give them consistent, ready-to-share content that highlights our expertise, our wins, announcements, projects, what's been performing well across the business, and just making sure that they're part of promoting Hatch and everything that we do.
Got you. No, that's perfect. That's all the context we need. So can you talk us through how advocacy landed on your plate at Hatch? Because I know from our previous conversation that it's not something that you were necessarily looking at the time.
Yeah. So I can't take the credit for this one. It actually started with my colleague, Daniel, who was just joining us from a different company at the time. And he had managed an employee advocacy program of his own. And then when he came here, he saw a gap and he thought it would be very effective if our subject matter experts could be contributors to what we do in terms of telling people about what we do, our expertise, the kind of projects we handle, the skill. Not everything can come from Hatch's LinkedIn because there's so much happening. But imagine if we split the efforts across different people, what kind of impact we would see. And so when he brought that thought process up, it was a good one. And we decided, okay, maybe we should actually give this a try. And because I was the one, or I am the one who's pretty much managing social media, it became my responsibility. So if I'm thinking end to end, what that could look like, how we wanted to start, what kind of tools we were going to use, all of that pretty much became my responsibility. Of course, being supported by Daniel and the rest of the team, we eventually got this off the ground. So that's how it landed on my plate.
Do you think I always find it interesting. To me, I think social media managers make sense. Somebody running the kind of social world makes sense to be running an advocacy program. Do you think it's logical? Was that just like the natural fit in Hatch, or was it sort of something that you wanted to kind of jump into and you wanted to have the kind of the control and influence over it?
I think it's natural. So someone who already has a feel of the different platforms, how they work, how we want to be positioned on each of those platforms, how we want to sound. That's pretty much something I had already been doing for about a year. So I had a full understanding of what that looked like. So it was just essentially transferring that process from Hatch's owned channels to these subject matter experts and just giving them similar content that we had already been sharing. So it just felt like the natural, progressive way to do things, as opposed to getting someone else to pretty much start that.
And so at this point, the idea for advocacy has been floated. It's now sitting with you, Tolu. How do you begin from there? What was the first step?
Okay, so the first step was actually getting a lot of approvals from the team. Like I said, this was something new. It was new territory for us. We hadn't done this before. We had no resources. We had no governance. We had no structure. We had to do our homework. We had to do research on what tools were available and which ones would fit our needs to the best possible way. So what kind of benefits would we get? How many people could we adopt for the first pilots? Can we scale? So these were some of the things that we started to think about. Once we figured out these features and pricing, we settled on one platform, and then we started work on what consistent content scheduling would look like, who would be responsible for producing that content, and who should be part of the pilot. So when we did that, the next step was IT. We had to then get IT approvals to ensure data security, because we're very, very big on that here at Hatch. Legal checks, all the due diligence. We had to make sure all those tracks were covered. And then once we were done, we then started to build out the program. So like I said, who be on this platform, who's going to be working on the pilot. Do we need any how-to guides? Do we need any onboarding materials? Are we going to have a content library? We started to flesh all those things out. And pretty much it took a month because, like I said, we launched officially in February. So all of this happened in January because we wanted to get it off the ground quickly and have a whole year to test and see what works and what doesn't work. So we started quick and we pretty much learned as we go. So we listed participants across the different sectors and then looked for which ones also had significantly good amount of following on LinkedIn, just so that the messages will land. And yeah, we got to work after that.
That's a perfect play-by-play of how I would want to set up an advocacy program from early doors.
Quick one. If you've ever wondered how your employee advocacy efforts are actually performing and not just what you think is happening, Disseminate offers a free employee advocacy health check. All you have to do is provide your company name and our team will pull real social data on how active your employees are, what impact it's having, and then how you stack up against your chosen competitors. So whether you're assessing the performance of your employee advocacy program or getting a benchmark for a future program, these will be the insights you can act on. The link's in the show notes.
It's really, really interesting from a pilot perspective. You identified those individuals. Was that a bit of a cherry picking process, or were there people in mind at the time?
Yeah, so the first thing that we did was to kind of just put it out there to say we're looking for volunteers to be part of this. It was tough at first because engineers are not really keen. It's not really their cup of tea to be posting on social media. So we had to volunteer people. So we had a list of people that had been voluntold to be part of this program. And then out of the full list that we had, We then had to shortlist further based on if there's already some activity on their LinkedIn, so it doesn't just come out of the blues, and if they had some level of following on LinkedIn as well. So you're not just talking into the void. So that's pretty much how we started off. Eventually, we became more strategic when it came to who we wanted there, how we added them, and what they did. But that first phase was just who do we have and how well do they fit what we're looking to achieve.
And so with that first pilot, what signals were you looking for to indicate whether or not this was a success?
So we were pretty much just focused on participation and reach, especially reach. So we had invited about 70 to 80 people, but only about 50 of them were active. So active in the sense of actually going in, signing in, looking for new content and sharing. So those active people, it really showed that there was some traction here and we could continue with that. So for us, that was a signal that there was something good here and that there could be potential success in the long run if we had this kind of consistency. We were also looking at the reach numbers. So what kind of impressions, engagement were we getting from this and how does it compare with what we're getting on Hatch's own page? And we were seeing very, very good numbers, which if we combine, is very good for us to show how well we're doing generally on social media for Hatch. So those were some metrics that we looked at.
Yeah, it's always very interesting when you compare the combined reach of, you said only 50. I think 50 out of 70 is first and foremost very impressive still. But when you see only 50 employees and the amount of reach they're able to generate compared to, Hatch's social media following is not small by any stretch of the imagination, but for it to still exceed that is incredibly impressive. But you mentioned about the fact that obviously for engineers, social media isn't typically part of their day-to-day, and a lot of them just do not care about it for the most part. Did you provide any training materials or anything along those lines to bring them up to speed and get them more comfortable sharing?
Definitely, we had no choice. Like you said, engineers are very process oriented. They want to understand exactly how A leads to B. So I literally had to walk them through everything from setup to scheduling to customization. Every single thing had to be properly explained and very detailed so that they knew what exactly they were getting into. And I also made sure to highlight what was in it for them, not just what it was for Hatch. How it boosts their personal brand just as much as it benefits Hatch, how they don't need to stress about thinking about what they want to say. We do the thinking for them. All they need to do is just schedule and post. So some of these things were, put into these training resources, shared with them momentarily, and eventually they got a hang of it, and it just made the process very seamless and straightforward.
Question around the participants and the training that you needed. Did you find the training was very functional in the sense of you need to log into LinkedIn, you need to press this button, you need to press that button? Or was it more, I guess, holistic training of this is the type of content we want to see, this is how you should kind of portray yourself on social?
It was a mix of both. So we had, like I said, to make it very detailed, what was involved in signing up, your email, your password, getting onto the dashboard, how to find the content, how to click, post or schedule, what you needed to do to personalize. All of those things were highlighted in the training. And then we had weekly resources that we would share because we created a Teams chat just so it's more engaging and people can communicate and talk about their experiences. And then I would share information about tip of the week. Here's how you can do things differently. How you can customize your post. Customizing your post would do XYZ for you, as opposed to if you just posted exactly what you saw. So it was a mix of everything. We tried to keep some things very detailed and straightforward so that no one gets confused, while also making some things very relatable and on demand so that we just have that balanced approach to making sure that the program worked out okay.
No, that's brilliantly insightful. I Unfortunately, we know that we can put together the best trainings in the world and do the best job imaginable in communicating the value of doing all of this, but there will always be people with whom it just doesn't click. So I'm just curious to know, during that pilot, and this doesn't even have to be specific to training, but what worked and what didn't?
So in terms of what worked, I'd say that getting engineers to embrace social media was the key thing. It actually worked. And if anyone thinks that they can't do it, I'm here to tell you absolutely can. Even though many were not keen at first, once they started to see the actual engagement on their posts, it encouraged them to keep going because they never would see such engagement before then. So some of them got invited to speak at conferences and events. A lot of people were getting traction that they ordinarily wouldn't have got. And so all of these things encouraged them to keep going, and that's what sustained the program ultimately. At Hatch, we have this saying in our manifesto that we are entrepreneurs with a technical soul. And that's something that I hammered to them consistently, because if we all see ourselves as entrepreneurs, then we all have a role to play in promoting and sharing about Hatch and what we do. So I'd say that's what worked. In terms of what didn't work, I'd say content volume. I struggled with that. When it comes to advocacy, you want to make sure that content is as consistent as possible. Some would say a minimum of 5 pieces of content every week. It could be different for different people, but if you have a group of people who are from different sectors, different business practices, you should make sure that they have at least one thing that resonates with them and their business practice, right? So 5 is a good number. Most of the time, we average 3 to 4 or 5 pieces a week. 5 was a good week for us. So in terms of that volume and making sure that there was a lot that every one of our sectors of business practices could share every week, I struggled with that. And that's also because I'm the one who's pretty much managing the system. Hopefully we get to a point where this is good enough and the value is seen by everyone in the company and we can expand the team. But this first few months where we're trying to show that value, it's just me who's managing. And so putting all that content together, managing the advocates, making sure the system works, it can be a lot. So content is where I struggled, but it still did okay.
So when it came to onboarding Tolu, I know obviously, we've spoken about the fact that it's particularly difficult with engineers, but how did you tailor the messaging or just your approach to really win them over?
So tailoring the messaging had to do with looking at the contents we already had and breaking them into digestible formats, then personalizing it. I look at it from my lens to say, if I were to post about a certain topic, how would I like to sound? Of course, not too formal. Even though I'm talking about a technical issue, I want to be somewhat relatable and real so that it's very organic. So having the thought behind that and then working with the contents, that maybe the articles, white papers, blogs that we've already drafted, I pick out pieces that I think would resonate the most with social media and just infuse some kind of personality into it to make sure that it doesn't come across as too rigid or I don't know what's the word to use. I think you understand what I mean. So that's pretty much how I tackled it in terms of making sure that the content was still technical enough to maintain the theme or the subject at hand, but relatable in a way that sounds like you or I actually said this. So yeah.
And did you find you started to recognize what content was resonating with the team? And that can be anything from the topic to the format.
Yeah, everyone likes to share good news. So whenever we had a new announcement or project or something exciting that's happened, you can see everyone just sharing that one. So whenever we had such news or information, I did not hesitate to just take it back to the platform that we used to share this content. And you see that kind of content would get the most traction from everyone. Also because it was not usually sector specific, it was very general. So anyone could share without feeling like they were talking about something that didn't really relate to what they do on a day-to-day.
So Tolu, you mentioned in our initial conversation that leadership support was key in running a successful pilot and getting this off the ground. Can you just expand on what that looked like and how it helped?
So we had the support of our global marketing and communications director who AOK'd the program from the beginning. He pretty much just aligned all our marketing leadership with the program. And because of that, it made everything a lot easier, from content creation to keeping the different SMEs in check and making sure that they were engaged. Because we had that backing from our global director, everyone pretty much saw the importance and seriousness of this new strategy for us, and they pretty much all followed suit. So that really helped. It's a really important part of getting a program like this off the ground, especially in maybe a team or a company where such a thing is not very popular. You might need one or two leaders to put their back behind it, to just emphasize the value that they see, and that would help people to see the seriousness in it and want to participate.
And just on that, obviously having their backing and their support is hugely beneficial, but then something that I think can really take things to another level is when they're actively participating themselves. So do you have members of your leadership team who are involved in the program, so, registered to the platform and sharing and things like that?
Yes, and they're the most active ones too. They're there, they're sharing,
amazing.
They're posting, encouraging others to do the same. They do see the value, and they see how this can cascade into something much bigger than what it is right now in terms of actually shaping our marketing efforts. And that's why they're on there to test, to see what's working, what's not, how we can improve, how we can do better, and how that could lend itself to bigger projects to come.
That's awesome. Well, after the pilot, so I know obviously you mentioned that initially you were focused on reach and active users and just getting things moving. So since that pilot phase, what's changed now in how you measure success?
A lot of things have changed. Actually, not much has changed. We started the program thinking more about metrics like reach, shares, likes, those things that we talk about in marketing. And while all of those things are great, there's some other things that we started to see along the line that could indicate success and can help with other decisions as we go. So things like, are people actually participating? If they're not, it could be an indication of the content itself. If it's not good enough, maybe they don't think that they should be sharing that. So things like that can help you see if your own content is actually good enough. So how can you improve that? How can you do better? Because it also would reflect on how your other audiences are receiving that content. If your employees are not even sharing to start with, if that makes sense. Another thing is how well are our employees actually personalizing their posts, and are they getting comfortable enough to share outside of what is provided within the program? And so why we're thinking about these things is because they're like habits. So it's not just about advocacy anymore. It's about how do you condition your employees to see social media as a key tool to start talking about Hatch, even outside of this program. Because like I said, we all have a role to play. So if we're able to build that habit with a group of 100 people, their own audiences too, who are employees at Hatch, will see them and the consistency, and then they know that this is a thing that they can do on their own. And then we start a movement. People start to post on their own. And so these are some of the things that we're looking at side by side, the hard metrics like reach and shares and all of those things, to see how all of that can compound into a successful program.
I think that anecdotal sort of culture shift almost within a business is one of those things that's so hard to track, but it is so evident after a year, 2 years with an advocacy program, where just people's attitudes towards social media can change so drastically. And that's really, really cool that that's a part of that process for you, and like ways that you're measuring it is not just a passing comment on that. That's actually something that you're really starting to notice, which is great.
So as a next step, you mentioned in our initial conversation that you were aiming to move towards campaign-aligned advocacy. And I absolutely love this idea because I think it's indicative of that culture shift that we've just discussed. But can you tell us a little bit more about what this campaign-aligned advocacy looks like in practice?
Yes, definitely. So like I said earlier, we had been more focused on a generalist approach where we just shared content that we had either posted on Hatch's page or maybe it was on our websites, or repurposed content from our blogs and articles and all of that stuff. And while that was great, and of course we did see a lot of traction, we asked ourselves, what if advocacy was tied directly to the campaigns that we run? So that's where things started to get a lot more interesting. So middle of last year, we tested our first campaign-aligned advocacy group with our Europe team. So we got a group of them, and then they became the faces of a running project. And what we did was to give them weekly content, so personalized posts, thought leadership pieces, blogs, highlights from events, everything that was tied to that campaign. And so when we did that, the results were actually incredible, because the posts that we would typically do on just Hatch's page versus what kind of reach we saw with their own posts, when we combined that together, it was massive. It boosted the overall campaign numbers significantly. We saw a higher traffic to the website, more eyes on our videos, on our assets, and I think just because the content came directly from people, not just the brand, it felt more organic, it felt very real. And I think that's what the audiences really responded to. So that was a part of the puzzle that had been missing before then. And once we realized that and we tapped into it, we saw the value in that, and we want to scale that further going further into the year. So being able to just pull together a dedicated advocacy report as well. So typically when you run a campaign, of course, you submit a report to show how well it performed, and then you cover things from media relations to brand management, experiential. Having to add that extra layer of advocacy as part of the report and show real numbers, it's a great thing. And so we want to have advocacy as a big part of our conversations going forward when it comes to thinking about campaigns, how we want to run them, execute them, and track and report them going forward. So that's pretty much where we're going now. That's the shift I was going to talk about earlier that I told you was coming. But yes, that's pretty much what we're doing differently, and we're pretty excited to see how that works out.
That's amazing to hear. And it's music to, I was going to say my ears, but I imagine to Elliot's ears as well. We've both worked for the 7-8 for quite a long time. Elliot, I think a year or two longer than me, and we can both remember the days when employee advocacy was particularly niche, and we were banging the drum trying to get people to realize the potential of this as a tactic, especially in the marketing world. So to hear it now mentioned in the same conversation as, it's not something that's just another element of social media. We have corporate social media, we have employee advocacy, we have email, etc. It's a dedicated channel. So it's just amazing to hear. But while we're talking about, numbers, performance, etc., this doesn't have to be related to numbers or performance per se, but what's the biggest win that you've seen from your employee advocacy program so far?
Biggest win, I would say that honestly, just getting the campaign off the ground was a big win for me. Like I said, working with engineers, very different, very process driven. It was a lot to just get it off the ground, in a technical organization like Hatch, especially one where social media is still relatively new. Everything you see us doing right now is pretty new. So it took a lot of planning, consistency, strategies, and of course the help of an amazing marketing team to get this off the ground. And I'm very grateful for that. So it's something to be proud of. And I think that's a win in itself for me, if I do say so myself. Yeah. And from a B2B standpoint, I can't tell you categorically what the win looks like, because you know how it is in marketing. It's very hard sometimes to draw a straight line from a campaign to a tangible outcome. But I'm just going to say that in terms of awareness, we have seen a remarkable growth. We see people seeing more of Hatch, going to the website to learn more. The traffic, to the website is immense. Participants are engaged. They're being asked to come speak at events. They're connecting with people who want to learn more about what we do. So these measures of success, even though not hard metrics like reach and the rest, they are wins for us, and I would categorize them as such. So
I think rolling out a platform and a tool and an advocacy program as a whole in any business is always a massive win from my perspective, particularly when it's a lift to a degree for where the business was previously, as you say, with engineers and people that aren't quite as socially savvy. Let's go with, I think that's a massive win.
Tolu, I know you're planning to scale this year as well. So whether that's scale in terms of performance or getting more of your engineers on board, how do you plan to scale this year?
I'd say that right now we're still working with the 100 seats that we have. We're taking things quarter by quarter, and truthfully, you never know what changes. You never know what big campaigns are coming down the pipeline. Who knows, we might need 1,000 seats before the year runs out. But right now, it's just about managing what we have to make sure we have a good thing going. The process works. We have a good content schedule. The library is filled with good and relevant content. So that's my focus. So if I'm going to treat it like an A/B test. So last year was more about a generalist approach. We saw how that worked. This year is more campaign focused. And then whatever we learn from the end of this year, we can then build something scalable and predict a model for 2027. So that's pretty much how I'm thinking around how we're going to manage the program for this year.
I've got one final question for you, Tolu, and this ties in with a number of the things that you've said, actually. So you mentioned about content curation being one of the challenges that you've faced to date. I have to be careful with how I talk about this because I don't want to suggest that using AI to create content at scale is the silver bullet to curating high-performing content. Of course, it needs to be used responsibly, but I'm just curious to know, have you explored using AI in your employee advocacy program? And if not, do you plan to?
Yeah, I have actually, but more to augment the strategy itself. So like I said, the first time doing any of this, none of the governance or trainings existed before now. I had to put all of these workflows and processes together on my own, and building all of these things from scratch. I had to make sure that I could see it end to end. So I obviously used AI to get ideas about how to make this polished, how to put this together, how we wanted to onboard SMEs, what kind of trainings we can look into. And pretty much now that we have those foundations in place, I know that we can go further. But in terms of using AI, we want to make sure that it does not replace the human element, because the whole purpose of an employee advocacy campaign is to keep that human element. So it should not be missing. So in everything that we do, we need to make sure that it's only augmenting and not replacing how we're making this work.
I completely agree. I think that's a nice point to finish on. I'll probably get banned from using this word soon, but authenticity, of course, is central to employee advocacy. And I know that gets thrown around so much on LinkedIn, but until there's another word, I'm going to continue to use that one. Tolu, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you the best of luck in 2026 with your program. Excited to see where it goes next.
Thank you so much, Lewis and Aliad, for having me here. This was great.
Of course. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye-bye.